So we're starting in Genesis 47 tonight. Genesis 47. And before we get into our study, I want to make mention of something that Jerry and Judy Wilson have brought and made available to us. Up here on the front row, right in front of Jerry and Judy, are some rocks that they want you to see. No, they're not rocks. It's some pieces of marble, that they brought because there are some fossils inside these pieces. And they first mentioned these way back when we were studying Noah and the flood. But one of these, the smaller one, has some fossilized plant material in it. And then the other one, well, we're not exactly sure what it is, are we? Some critter of some kind. We don't know. Some kind of shell-like creature.
And the other is some type of tree, twigs.
All right. So, be sure to check that out if you're interested in such things. Really neat pieces to see how quickly these things were fossilized and put into that form. So, those are up here on the front row if you'd like to see those. All right. So Joseph's family has moved to Egypt, and they have settled in the land of Goshen, which goes by another name in our material for tonight, and that is the name of Ramesses. That's chapter 47 and verse 11. You'll see that also in Exodus chapter 1, but it's referring to the same place. Joseph will, when his family gets there, he will bring 5 of his brothers and his father Jacob to go and appear before Pharaoh. And I want to just mention what Pharaoh says to Jacob in verse 8. Well, let's go to verse 7. Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, "How old are you?" And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage." So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. Now, Joseph obviously has a very good relationship with this Pharaoh. The Pharaoh has said, "Sure, bring your family. Let them settle in the best of our lands and build your lives here." And he gives that to Joseph. He says that to Joseph because Joseph has his respect. Joseph has navigated the years of plenty and the years of the famine, and they're still in the years of the famine at this point, but Joseph has navigated that really well, and so this Pharaoh trusts Joseph, and that's important because when we come to Exodus chapter 1, in verse 8, we are specifically told there that a new Pharaoh was in power who did not know Joseph, okay? Now, we're talking many, many years later when we come to Exodus. Of course it's a new Pharaoh. It's many years, centuries even. But the point being, Joseph at this point in history is a man who is highly respected by Pharaoh and the Egyptian people and Egyptian government. But there's going to come a time when Joseph's memory is no more, and things have changed for the Israelite people. So, chapter 47, we get a look, an explanation into Joseph's administration, as he is the overseer of all the things that are happening in Egypt. As his family comes before Pharaoh and everything gets sorted out and they're given Pharaoh's blessing to settle in the land of Goshen, and Pharaoh has met the patriarch Jacob, the father of the family, and things are going just as well as they could possibly go in the middle of a famine. The famine has become so severe at this point that the text will tell us of some drastic things that had to be done in order for the people to survive. Verse 13 beginning, there was no bread in all the land. The famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. So the people of Egypt are buying grain from Joseph, and they're using their money. But then the money runs out. Then they come to an agreement with Joseph that they're going to buy grain using their livestock and using their herds. And so that becomes the new currency because there's no more silver that the people can pay. Well, then what happens when the livestock and the herds run out and the famine is still going? Now the people have to come up with a new currency. And what do they come up with? They sell their lands and themselves. Okay? So they say, we will sell our lands to you, sell the land to the government, and we will even sell ourselves in exchange for bread. And Joseph institutes a land agreement. The people will sell their land, but then Joseph, of course, will let them continue living there, and he will give them seeds that they can plant for a future harvest. And when that future harvest eventually comes, Pharaoh gets a cut right off the top of 20%. Okay? So there's a new tax that's introduced, but the people are willing to accept that in order to survive. Then chapter 47, verses 27 through 31, you have Joseph's vow to his father Jacob. Israel, Jacob, dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen. They had possessions there, and they grew and multiplied exceedingly. Now verse 29, when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, if I found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh. Well, there's that expression again that we've talked about. I'll refer you to earlier classes. I don't think you guys really want to go there again. Please do not bury me in Egypt, he says. Joseph, don't bury me here. But let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And Joseph swears to him that he will do it. He says, verse 31, swear to me, and Joseph swore to him, so Israel bowed himself on the head of the, what does your translation say? Bed? Anybody say something different? Leaning on the top of his staff, okay? Consult the book for the explanation of why that's different. It basically just comes down to the Septuagint. The Greek translation of the Hebrew says one thing, and the Hebrew text, the Messianic text, as it's called, says something else. Okay? I think many translators go with bed in verse 31 because of what happens in the very next scene, chapter 48. Jacob is in the bed, and he musters strength, verse 2, when Joseph brings his two sons, and Jacob is going to give a blessing to Joseph's two sons. And I think because of what happens in chapter 48, a lot of translators will go with the word bed in 47:31. Okay? But again, consult the Lamp to My Feet book about that. There's a detailed discussion of it there. Joe?
There may not be anything that you could bring up in this, but it just seems like a burial place is very significant to them. My thought is, once you're dead, matter, but it's obviously very important to them. So is there anything to that as far as, is that just cultural, or is that something that God's promised and they want to be in that final resting place?
Yeah, the cultural element is there. I think people, especially in the ancient world, but even people today in other parts of the world, have a much greater attachment to the land of their people than we do in America, right? It's not uncommon for us to move from one state to another and not really give any. I mean, we buy a house, we live in it 4 or 5 years, we sell a house, we move on, and you may have oh man, we made memories in this house. But it's not stopping me from moving, right? I've still got to get on with my life. I think there are other places in the world where the attachment to the land is much greater, right? This farm has been in my family for so many generations and that kind of thing. I think that's the main idea.
Perhaps the land promise is also a factor in this.
No doubt about that.
Being buried in the land that God swore they would get.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I guess the specific place, though, the burial place, the cave of Machpelah, right? It's already paid for, that's true. But yeah, it is, of course, in the land of Canaan, and the land promise is a key thing. All right, good. Let's go to chapter 48 now, where Jacob blesses Joseph's sons. This is a really touching chapter, and chapter 49 as well. Both of these chapters dealing with the blessings of Jacob's descendants. But in chapter 48, Joseph brings his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to his father Jacob. Now, do you remember who was born first? Yeah, Manasseh was born first, okay? And that's reflected in the wording, the order of their names in verse 1. So Jacob is told that Joseph is coming, and he strengthens himself in verse 2, and he sat up in his bed. And then Jacob says to Joseph, verse 3, God Almighty appeared to me in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And now, verse 5, your two sons, what do you notice? The order changes there. Your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. It's the younger who's mentioned first. Okay? And we're going to see that continues to be important as Jacob blesses these two grandsons. So Jacob kissed them and embraced the two sons, and he said to Joseph, and this is such a touching thing, in verse 10, the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. I hope that stirs a memory for you. Have we ever read in Genesis before about a patriarch who was getting old and his eyesight was bad and he had to give a blessing, right? Okay, you remember when Jacob stole Esau's blessing when his father Isaac's and his eyes were bad, okay? So you have some similar things there. But verse 11, Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but in fact God has shown me your offspring. How wonderful. I mean, Jacob lived all these years, 22 years, thinking that Joseph was dead. And he thought he would never see his son Joseph again, but now he gets to see his grandsons through Joseph. What a blessing that was for him. So verse 13, Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. The custom was that the older child would receive the blessing, with the patriarch's right hand being placed on the eldest child. So Joseph brings Manasseh over to Jacob's right side so that Jacob can place his right hand on Manasseh. But when Joseph sets up the two boys around his father, Jacob moves his hands, crosses his hands like this, and he puts his left hand on the eldest, Manasseh, and his right hand on Ephraim. And when he pronounces the blessings, Joseph tries to stop him and say, wait, you're doing it wrong. You've got the wrong hand on the wrong. And Jacob says, no, I'm doing exactly what I want to do. I know what I'm doing. Jacob had reasons for blessing these boys in this way. So, verse 21, Israel said to Joseph, behold, I am dying, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. Go back to what Alan said earlier about the land promise that God had given. Moreover, I've given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow. Okay, we're going to have some more to say about that two-portion idea as we get into chapter 49. Because what happens in chapter 49, after Ephraim and Manasseh are blessed, really the blessing of chapter 48 with Joseph's two sons, it really flows right into chapter 49 with the blessing of all of Jacob's sons. So really these two chapters should go together. So chapter 49 and verse 1, Jacob then calls all of his sons. And he says, "Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father." Now there's a lot that we can comment on in chapter 49. I'm just going to hit the highlights. I'm not going to go through every single brother's blessing. Okay? We're going to hit the high points. But as Jacob is giving these blessings, these are prophetic blessings, right? Many of these are forward-looking, what is going to come of this son and the people that come from him and the kind of people that they will be and so forth. But when we use the word blessing, oh, that was a real blessing to me. Oh, you are such a blessing. We use that word in terms of positive things. This was a positive thing in my life. That's not always the way the word is used in the Bible. Jacob is pronouncing a blessing on each one of his sons, but not everything he says is positive. In fact, some of these things that he says they're pretty sad. They're pretty negative. The sons of Leah are blessed first. Verse 3, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power." Okay, so far so good. That sounds really positive. But, verse 4, "You are unstable as water," or you're like a boiling pot of water, "and you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. You went up to my couch." Reuben committed a sexual sin with his father's concubine. You can read about that in Genesis 35, verse 22. And so Jacob says, "Reuben, you're my firstborn, and you're the one who should have had all of the rights and the privileges of the firstborn son. But you don't get those because of what you did with Bilhah, my wife." So, not the positive blessing in the sense that we usually use the term. I want you to turn over to 1 Chronicles chapter 5. This is very explicit, and I think it's good to look at. 1 Chronicles chapter 5. This is referenced. The family of Reuben is discussed in the first 10 verses of chapter 5. I want you to look at verse 1. "Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn. But because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright." So instead of Reuben receiving the birthright privileges as he otherwise would have, because of what he did, who got those privileges instead? Joseph's sons, Genesis 48, Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay? All right, let's go back to Genesis 49. The next two sons, verse 5, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." What is the punishment for Simeon and Levi? It's at the end of verse 7.
They won't have a specific region.
They will not have a tribal allotment of land when the land is divided by Joshua. They won't have a portion of land. Instead of having a designated portion of land that their people live in, they will be scattered throughout all the land of Canaan. Now, why? What is this, their anger and their wrath, what is it referring to? Do you remember? Yeah, Genesis 34, when their sister Dinah was raped by Shechem, the prince, in the city of Shechem. You remember that story? Simeon and Levi took charge, and they killed all the men in that city. And what did Jacob feel after that? Do you remember? Was he happy they did that? No, he was very upset with them because he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we're trying to build a life here, and you have just jeopardized our family's well-being in this region. And so because of their action of anger and vengeance, they get no land for their tribe. Now, think about the tribe of Levi for a minute. You remember when Joshua divides the land, Levi and Simeon don't get any land, but what does God do with Levi's people? They become the tribe of priests. Now, they have no land allocation. They end up living in a number of different cities throughout, and God actually wants to use this to his advantage. Because what are the priests doing? Well, they're offering sacrifices in Jerusalem, but what else are the priests instructed to do? To be the teachers of the law. What a great idea to take these people who don't have a land portion allotted to them, scatter these teachers of the law of Moses throughout all the land of Canaan, so that God's people always have a teacher of the law close by. That's pretty smart, isn't it? It's almost like God knew what he was doing. Now, that didn't always work out, though, did it? A lot of times the Levites, the priests, were pretty rotten, not very good teachers, not very good role models. But the idea to have them scattered throughout the land was a really good idea. And you see that being initiated even here. Verse 8 begins talking about Judah. Judah's blessing, and his really is a blessing in the sense that we think of it, is second in length only to Joseph's later in the chapter. Lots of good things are said about Judah. You are the one whom your brothers will praise, verse 8 says. Your father's children will bow down before you. He's discussed as a lion, someone who has the strength of a lion in verse 9. Verse 10 really contains the key that I want you to underline in your Bible. If not in your Bible, at least underline it in your head. The scepter will not depart from Judah. This is significant. What's a scepter? It's the symbol of the power of whom? The king. If the authority has the scepter, that's the symbol of his power and his authority. Okay, the scepter will not depart from Judah. Kings will always be in Judah. Okay, so let's kind of look ahead a little bit. Who was Israel's greatest king? In the period of the United Kingdom, he was the second one they had. His name was David. What tribe was David from? Judah. Yeah. Now, from the lineage of David, 1,000 years later will come another king in Israel whose name is Jesus. And what tribe is he from? And King Jesus, is there any end to his reign? The authority will never depart from Judah. Even here, Genesis 49 and verse 10, already looking ahead to the great king, David, and the greater king, King Jesus, coming from the tribe of Judah. All right. It's interesting to think about how this could even be thought of by Jacob. How could this even be mentioned? Kings. King ruling over what? A nation. Yeah, but this isn't a nation yet. This is just a family of 70 people, right? It's not a nation yet, and yet Jacob's talking about kings. Also think about this. Long time in the future, after Joshua leads the people into the promised land, when Joshua dies, what form of government comes along after that? The judges The very last judge, the 15th judge, Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel come to Samuel and they said, give us a king. Well, did God ever tell them you should seek for a king? No, he didn't. And yet the scepter will not depart from Judah. There's kingly language way back here. Even when it wasn't even in God's program of design for the nation of Israel to have a king. And yet, he makes this prophecy. Really incredible to see the wisdom of God coming through. Okay, we're skipping over Zebulun, Issachar, Dan. Not much said about them. The things that are said of them are much shorter. But these are the sons of the concubines that are discussed in verses 16 through 21. And then in verse 22, the blessings on Rachel's two sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And of these verses, 22 through 27, Joseph gets all these verses except 26. But I just remembered, Joe, you had your hand up a moment ago. What were you going to say?
Just this passage about the scepter not pointing to Judah. Is that quoted in the New Testament? In this context, I was trying to seem like it was back then.
I don't think it is. You can double check me on that, but I don't think it is. Now, there is a discussion about like Jesus being born of the lineage of David, right? And even Gabriel says that to Mary in Luke 1. And over his kingdom, there will be no end to his reign, and he'll come from the lineage of David, that kind of thing. But as far as this being quoted, I don't think it is. Okay. Joseph gets verses 22 through 26. And there's a number of great expressions that are spoken of God in these verses. God is referred to as the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the rock of Israel, your father's God, the Almighty. Some really great titles, for lack of a better term, are used of God. And there's some things that are said about Joseph that speak to the abundance that he and his descendants would enjoy. The one who ensures blessings from the heavens above. So there's going to be rain for your crops on your people. Blessings that come from the deep below. So that would refer to seemingly streams of water and wells. There will be blessings that come from the breast and the womb, which would be a way to refer to abundant offspring that would come for Joseph. So Jacob gives these great blessings on Joseph because, well, he's still the favorite. Followed by Benjamin. Not a whole lot said about Benjamin. Verse 27, Benjamin is told that he's going to have, his descendants would be characterized by war, basically, is the idea. He's a ravenous wolf. He'll devour the prey. It's going to be this man who is just characterized by war and strength and military. And you even see that as we move into the book of Judges in particular. At the end of the chapter, Jacob dies and is going into chapter 50. You have his burial, but Jacob's death is at the end of chapter 49. Again, the burial place is mentioned in verses 29 and 30 and the importance there. In verse 31, it was there that they buried Abraham and Sarah. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah. And there I, Jacob says, buried Leah, my wife. The field and the cave that was purchased from the sons of Heth. So Jacob, again, has already made Joseph promise to bury him there. And Joseph will do that. So as we go into chapter 50, it's now time to carry out that oath that Joseph swore to his father to bury him in the land of Canaan, in the land or the cave at Machpelah, where all of the other patriarchs are buried. This was a big deal. There was mourning, and for Jacob for 70 days, the text says, the Egyptians mourned for him. And Joseph requests that Pharaoh allow him to leave Egypt and go to the land of Canaan and fulfill his oath to his father. Pharaoh gives him permission. Again, great relationship exists between these two. And there's a large group of people who go with Joseph. Of course, his brothers go, and some of their families, not all, but some. Some Egyptians go, and it creates this large caravan processional that's going to carry Jacob's body back to the burial place. Now, once Jacob is dead and buried, Joseph's brothers are afraid. Well, now that father's gone, Joseph is going to take his vengeance. He's going to get us back for the bad things that we did to him all those years ago. And so they go to Joseph and they say, before our father died, he made us promise that we would come to you and ask for forgiveness. And now, I don't know if they really had that conversation. Maybe they did. Maybe this isn't them trying to trick Joseph and just guilt trip him. Maybe it was a real conversation that they had with their father. But it doesn't matter, because Joseph says, you have nothing to worry about. Make your home here in Egypt. I will provide for your families, for your children. I will take care of you. There's not going to be any vengeance. Incredible spirit that Joseph has. Is just an incredible spirit to not seek that retribution. And again, we've referred to this in recent classes and my sermon on Sunday. Verse 20 of chapter 50, Joseph, he sees the hand of God in his life. And if God is the one who's doing this, then why would I take retribution? God's plan is unfolding. Don't be afraid. Then the last 5 verses of the book, Joseph dies. He lived to be 110 years old, verse 22 says. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. Joseph lived long enough to see his great-great-grandchildren, if I have that right. And Joseph says, like his father did, don't leave my body in Egypt. Carry me back. When you leave this land, take my bones with you. Carry my body out. Don't leave me here. And so we will see that the people of Israel do that when we go into the book of Exodus. Okay. How many of you saw some things in Genesis this time around you'd never seen before? Or maybe you just missed? I don't know how many things I saw that I had just overlooked before. So many things. And this is why we keep studying the books of the Bible. There's always more for us to get. Okay, thank you everybody. Look forward to starting Exodus with you